Hi everyone. Tonight's story is not about kings or legendary battles, but about small details that history may not notice, but they were everything to those who lived. Imagine yourself not as a visitor, but a resident in the heart of the Roman Empire, not in a lofty palace, but where most people lived in narrow corners above the crowded streets under sloping roofs. This is not the life of an emperor, but the life of someone who carries the burden of the next day on his shoulders. So, before you fall asleep, if you find anything in this video worthy of admiration, do not hesitate to press the like button. If this type of story interests you, subscribe to receive more. Imagine yourself waking up before dawn in a small, stifling room, no more than a corner in a high, decaying building called the insula. The smell of rot and dampness mixes with your first breaths, and the air is a heavy mixture of smoke from oil lamps, old sweat, and the remains of decaying food from the previous night. The walls of your room are thin, and you can almost hear everything through them. The intermittent snoring of the neighbors, the crying of a child, the recitation of a prayer in his language. Shaken and perhaps sounds you don't want to know their source. Every sound passes as if it's happening inside your head. The floor is slanted and creaks with every movement, and the old wood beneath it groans under the weight of the days. This building is not a home, it's just a possibility of falling. In the corner of the room, a jug of cold water and a piece of bread hardened from yesterday. You dip it in diluted wine, not for the taste but because water alone is rarely safe. There is no internal bathroom, only a clay jar in which you store your waste. Then you try to go down with it via eroded stairs, hoping not to slip. And I fall something, and I come across someone on your way who shouts at you or pushes you carelessly down. Below, the street is no less chaotic. Piles of human filth and donkey dung and gray water that creeps like snakes. Children run barefoot in torn clothes between bread and water cellars and screaming, and your eyes keep searching for something, maybe a job opportunity, maybe a girl from Rama. After a meager breakfast that barely suffices your hunger, you go out to the street, if it can be called a street. The passages between the buildings are not wide enough for more than one car, but the traffic does not calm down. The sounds of horses collide with the hum of wheels, the shouts of vendors mingle with the screams of children, and the smell of burnt bread blends with the smell of garbage. The scene is full of life, but it is not the life you desire. The road to work is not a short or safe journey. You work in construction, loading goods, or cleaning shops, and perhaps you are trying to sell something simple: dried figs, water bottles, or homemade candles. There are no guarantees, no insurance. No one asks about you if you are absent for a day or two. The employer might shout at you, deduct half the wages, or not pay at all because the law is on his side. Public toilets are few and often closed or broken, and bathing is a seasonal experience. You go to the public bath when you can, paying a little to share a tub of lukewarm water with strange men whose bodies are stuck together. No one speaks and no one looks. The thick steam fills the place, alleviating the smell of sweat but not erasing it. On the walls are old inscriptions, obscene phrases, and drawings. Silver is not a place to relax, but to remove a layer of fatigue. Pain is always present: joints, toothache, an unnamed pain in the stomach. You ask someone about the treatment, and he directs you to a herbalist or a cupper. If you are lucky, you find someone who knows a little about medicine, but even doctors deal with the same tools used by the blacksmith. In the other corner of the city, another life takes place. Processions, speeches, and luxurious markets, but you are not invited, and you do not want to approach there, where they wear soft fabrics, eat cooked food, and are served by hands they do not know. As for you, the goal is clear: to survive until the evening, to return to your room, stretch out on your worn-out bed, and wait for everything to start again when evening comes. The sunlight turns to yellow-brown shadows that wrap around the mud walls and sink into the cracks. But sunset in Rome does not mean the end of troubles, but the beginning of another anxiety. The city begins to breathe freely when the air cools a little, but this breathing is rough and restless. The merchants end their day and close their doors, and the market empties of the sounds of selling to be filled with other sounds: singing, drunkenness, the clinking of glasses, belts. In the dark corners of the side streets, thieves creep in, some of them children no older than 10, looking for an open wallet or a worn belt. The oil lamps are timidly lit, their light weak and trembling, and you can hardly see where you are standing. There are no police as we know them today, only paid guards who do not intervene unless the complainant is rich enough to deserve protection. You only hope that you do not meet a strange eye that peers too long into your room, trying to close the door with wooden pegs. There is no lock, no security. Your neighbor might knock on the door to ask you about food or something. All you want is for the night to pass in peace, to forget the sound of a rock downstairs, and for the building not to catch fire as it did twice last month. Buildings in Rome catch fire easily. Bricks are fragile, the ceilings are wooden, and oil is everywhere. When a fire breaks out, no one rushes to help. Everyone flees because water is scarce, the stairs are weak, and death is close. You look at the ceiling, count its cracks, and listen for the movement of the rats inside. They are a constant companion. They know their way to food, blankets, and even children. You try to ignore them. You try to ignore everything. No dreams of the night, only a hope that morning will come. Morning arrives, but there is nothing new in it. The sun rises as it did yesterday, slowly, as if it is being forced to appear. The light streams through the cracks, not to illuminate the place, but to remind you that you are still here. You get out of bed, you feel pain in your neck, in your back, in the knee that buckled yesterday when you climbed the stairs quickly. There is no calendar in your life, no dates. You wait for the days to be measured by the number of loaves of bread you can get, by the number of nights that pass without problems, by the number of times that no one notices that you are weaker than you appear, and that you were lucky. You get news of a new job, cleaning a brickyard, or even emptying sewers. It's a task that others reject, but you accept it because you don't have the luxury of refusing. You head to the place, start working in silence, thinking about bread and water, about the short rest that might be granted to you. You think a little about the past, then stop because the past doesn't hold anything for you worth seeking refuge in. Relationships here are not warm. Everyone is busy with their own struggle. You might know the names of some of the neighbors or notice that one of them has been absent for the third day, but no one asks. The only connection between you is that you live in the same fragility and fear the same fate. Sometimes you hear about a party in the wealthy neighborhood. Music passes through the high windows and reaches you like whispers from another world. Or you see an imperial procession passing from afar with its bright colors and clean horses. You stop for a minute, then go back on your way because you are not part of that scene, and there will only be this day before you, this muddy present, and you are trying to remain standing in it, nothing more, in the heart of the Parthian Empire, in a palace that is now known only from dilapidated ruins. Radagona was born a princess of royal lineage stretching back to the early Medes. Her childhood was not only surrounded by silk and gold, but also by clouds of anticipation. Anticipation of the fate that awaited the daughters of kings, where marriage was politics and tranquility was obedience. But something in her nature did not agree with this fate. Radagona walked in the palace gardens in rough leather shoes instead of embroidered sandals, reading about military campaigns and sitting with the servants, listening to their stories. The distant villages and the changing seasons she did not desire adornment, but rather understanding the land, the people, and the authority. She often looked at the map of the kingdom and stopped at its northern borders, where the cold and rebellion were unquenchable. When the expected day came, a great rebellion would break out in one of the remote states. The leaders gathered at the royal court to propose sending armies. It was customary to send a veteran general or a prince far from the royal line to quell the rebellion. But Radagona cut short the argument and asked for permission to lead herself. Some laughed. The king hesitated. The guards whispered. But she did not wait for full approval. She ordered the making of a new shield, removed her adornment, and tied her hair in a single knot. She said, "I will not comb it until the rebellion is quelled." Her oath was not just a response to a limit, but a covenant between her and the land from which the rebellion emerged. She wanted to fight the war, not as a camera ruling from afar, but as a body living in the battle with all its dirt, pain, and sweat. When she left the gate of the capital, she was not followed by an entourage. but accompanied by a limited number of soldiers and many eyes watching and wondering. The road to the north was long, fraught with treachery and fatigue. The roads were unpaved and the wagons moved slowly over broken stones. The cold wind peeled the skin and pierced the armor. In the villages that Radagagono passed through, she was not greeted with chants of victory, but with looks tinged with fear and suspicion. Some residents saw her as hope, and others as a ghost from the palace who came to take revenge. But she paid no attention to compliments or hostility. Rather, she asked where the rebels met, who supplied them, and who incited them. For her, war was not just a battle, but a network of information from worn-out relationships that allowed for an explosion. She would wake up at dawn, ride her horse before the soldiers, and inspect the arrows, equipment, and roads. She would eat what they ate and sleep where they slept, on the dirt or in the embrace of a sloping wall without a tent or a pillow. Her hair became more tangled every day. The first clash was with a small group of rebels, more like bandits than an organized army, but they knew the terrain and possessed enthusiasm and tension, which made them more dangerous. They surprised the caravan. At night, the fighting became hand-to-hand without regular formations. Some of her soldiers fell, but they repelled the attack. Rodaguna did not retreat or hide, but rather fought with a short dagger and a long spear amidst the commotion and dust after the attack. She stood among her wounded, not to give a speech, but to gather the dead and bury them herself. She dug with her hands, repeating something resembling a prayer. She did not know the words, but there was enough pain in her to silence the whispers around her. Her news spread quickly. She was no longer just the princess, but the leader who did not sleep before her soldiers and did not eat before she was reassured by them, and who fought not for personal glory, but for a covenant she had made, a strange but true popular covenant. With each new day, the front expanded and the knot became more complicated. When Rodaguna reached the city of Ostak, the sun had begun to descend towards autumn, and the cold was gnawing at the limbs of the horses before the feet. The city was fortified with walls of dried bricks, its markets were closed, and its people were divided between silence and complicity. Some joined the rebels, and some preferred neutrality out of fear or desire for survival, but she did not see them as enemies, but rather as raw material for dialogue or war, depending on the situation. She decided not to attack the city directly. Instead, she imposed a long siege, cutting off supply routes. She sent messengers inside the walls, offering not only forgiveness but also food security and the restoration of normal life. She understood that the fight was not only on the battlefield, but in the hearts of the people, whose loyalties swung between resentment and fear. But time was not on her side. Winter approached, and the camps began to crumble before the rain and cold. Soldiers were sick, firewood was running low, and water froze in the jars. Among these men, some began to doubt the usefulness of the siege, the leadership of a woman, the usefulness of a war based on a personal oath. She heard the whispers, but she did not respond with authority. Instead, she gathered the soldiers in the evening in front of a large fire and stood among them, her hair disheveled, as if the wind had not stopped for months. She said calmly, "Whoever does not know why we are fighting should return home. There will be no shame or punishment for them. As for whoever remains, let them remain by a covenant that will not change with the rain." In the morning, no one left. Then came the night when everything changed. One of the city gates was secretly opened with the help of a merchant who pledged to end the siege from within. Her forces entered silently and recaptured the city without a massacre, without a loud victory. It was a battle that was more intelligent than bloody. The next day, Radagagana combed her hair for the first time in months. Every strand that was untied, every knot was worth a month of cold, or a city that had regained its loyalty, or a soldier who had not surrendered. But she had not yet returned to the palace. There were more cities and more of a promise that had not yet ended. As the heat returned to the sky, Radagagana's campaign had transformed from a military deterrent into a symbolic movement. The cities that had held out with weapons began to open their gates before their armies reached them, not out of fear but out of amazement. It was not the letters of the court or the threats of the ruler that changed the popular mood. It was the stories that flowed from one soldier to another, from one villager to her friend, about the princess who slept only on the ground, and the woman who fought with her body, not her signature, and about the strange oath she had taken, a private personal covenant, but one that was sincere enough to ignite a fire in hearts exhausted by betrayals, taxes, and distant rulers. When Radagagana entered the ancient city of Suez, there was no resistance. Its notables came out to receive her, with laurel wreaths, but with water and salt, symbols of hospitality and protection in their traditions. She did not need to give a fiery speech or impose taxes. She would pass through the markets quietly, asking the vendors about prices, visiting the temples, and leaving behind a feeling that rule could be close, not arrogant. She moved between cities without a procession, without a drum, without an entourage. Whenever she went, the legend went with her, not a written legend, but one passed on between tongues, from hunter to shepherd, from old man to grandson, about the one who stopped the country's bleeding without drowning it in blood. She did not exercise authority with words, but with presence. She would suddenly appear in a city she had just regained, enter the market, listen to people's complaints, and disappear days later. Everywhere, she left behind a feeling that she would return, even if she was never seen again. She was not building a new empire, but rather restoring a broken one. With steady steps and hair combed after ages of entanglement, Radaguna returned to the capital after a year and a half of absence, but the celebration she deserved was not waiting for her. The palace he began to feel fed up with her presence, her reputation, her story that had become bigger than the boundaries of the court. For some statesmen, she was an example that should be buried, not celebrated. The ruling sessions began to be conducted without her invitation, decisions passed silently, and letters not sent to her. This was not surprising, but she felt the weight of exclusion more than the harshness of the winter she lived in. She knew that her return did not mean an embrace, but rather an attempt to close the chapters of a book that she wrote with her own hand without permission. She understood the message and did not stay long. She left the palace again, not to war this time, but to the cities that had returned her loyalty, made her visit the markets, stay in the simple houses, talk to the soldiers who fought with her, and listen to the stories that tongues wove about her. She did not correct them, deny them, or praise them, but rather let them grow as they wished. In the villages, children ran after her horse, and women brought her food without being asked, and the soldiers talked about her as if she were a living legend or part of a secret prayer. In the capital, the court writers tried to erase her from the records or reduce her role to passing details. They portrayed her as a temporary leader, nothing more, a phase that had passed, but they did not understand anything. Memory is not limited to inscriptions, but is preserved in the body that fought, the eye that saw, and the hand that wrote her names on the walls of the baths with cheap ink. Radaguna passed from official history to popular legend, and there, in the shadows, her true power began. She passed since her first campaign ended, but her effects did not fade, and despite the court's attempts to erase her name, the name Radaguna was still whispered in the countryside, circulated in stories and tattooed on the edges of doors, as a symbol of rare steadfastness and a form of leadership that knows no pride and arrogance. Then came the day when she decided to wash her hair again. But this time, the act was not private, but rather a public, open ritual, closer to a popular ceremony than a royal decree. In an open square on the outskirts of the city of Ecbatana, under the fig and pomegranate trees, the old soldiers sat in long rows, and people from every village and valley came, not quite knowing why, but they felt that something was happening, something big and quiet. In the middle of the square, Radaguna sat on a round stone with a low, humble presence. She wore neither armor nor a crown, but a simple gray dress, and slowly began to comb her hair in front of everyone. Every knot that was untied was accompanied by a story, about a battle not fought with weapons, about a soldier who sacrificed his life for his comrades, about a city that surrendered with words, not with the sword. There was no sound except the sound of the comb piercing the tangled hair, as if searching memory. The act was simple, but the significance was enormous. Washing the hair, which began as a personal oath. It has now become a collective ritual, a feeling that victory is not measured only by what is written in the records, but by what remains alive in the eyes. When she finished, she did not speak. She only lifted her hair to the sun, as if to say, "I have fulfilled my promise." Then she stood up and walked among the people, as if nothing had happened, but something had changed forever. With the passing of the years, Radaguna no longer appeared much in the big cities. She did not retire, but chose to live on the margins, where there were no protocols or entourage, but a life similar to the one she fought for, simple, silent, full of earthy scents and cool breezes. She settled in a small house at the edge of a sparsely populated mountain range, in the middle of an old road that caravans used to pass through. Her house was not luxurious, nor was it surrounded by guards. There were only 2 trees near the door, a small water basin, and a stone stove. She would wake up at dawn, water her plants, and receive some visitors coming from the neighboring villages. Some of them did not believe that it was her. Some came just to stare or ask her for a blessing, or for her to tell them a story from those days that only the elderly remember. She did not like to talk about the war, but she would ask them about the weather and the crops, and she would smile when they said, "One of them said that the year is better than the previous one." She always tells them that good does not come from empires, but from the soil, if you know how to plant it. There was wisdom in her words, like mountains, not palaces. Every year she walked on a small path to a peak overlooking the plain that witnessed her first battles. She sat there for long hours, not moving, just looking, as if she was trying to understand something she had not understood before. Once, when she was on this peak, one of the young shepherds saw her, so he returned and told the people of the village, "I saw a woman combing the wind." No one understood what he meant, but they knew from his description that she was Radaguna died, Radaguna as she lived, quietly. No grand funeral, no funeral procession, no grand monument, just a hole in the mud and a quiet dawn. Those who buried her were few. A former soldier who had lost a hand in the war, an old woman who had accompanied her on one of her campaigns, and a boy carrying a water jug who knew her only from stories. But what they buried was only the body, and the story began to unfold again. Whenever the palace forgot her, the mountains remembered her. Whenever she was erased from the books, she was written again on the lips of girls on cold nights like an unwritten proclamation. She who swore not to bathe until the chaos subsided became a symbol of an idea larger than herself, that leadership is not given but earned, and that beauty is not in adornment but in action that changes reality. In some villages, if a girl is born strong-willed, they say to her mother, "This one has Radaguna in her." And on deserted walls in some old cities, the keen eye can glimpse half-obliterated holes, not clear writing, but perhaps threads or shadows resembling. Combing her hair, she may not have been just a princess. Perhaps she was an entire country that walked on her feet before the first laws were written and before the names of kings were engraved on stone. The bee was working, not caring about the seasons, wars, or the fluctuations of the throne. It only buzzed, built, and produced liquid gold, sweetness growing from flowers and patience. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs looked at the bee not as a small creature, but as a heavenly symbol. It was said that the tears of the god Ra, when they fell to the ground, turned into bees. This was not just a popular imagination, but a deep conviction that this creature exceeded its real weight. This conviction was reflected in the royal titles, as one of the titles of the pharaoh was the bee, the lord of the lands. The beehives there were not random, but rather clay cylinders arranged precisely, carried on boats, transported up and down with the Nile flood, as if they lived their own seasons within a river that never stopped. In Mesopotamia, Where Hammurabi wrote down the first human laws, legal provisions were allocated to regulate beekeeping and determine compensation in the event of the theft of a hive or the spoilage of the honey crop. It was not a luxury. Rather, it is a vital element in agricultural life and the economy of honey. It is a medicine, and contracts are sealed with a candle, and taxes are sometimes counted with it. Imagine yourself in an ancient Babylonian village. You hear the buzzing at dawn and see the boys gathering nectar with bees. There is no need for shouting or orders, for the bees taught them that a silent order is stronger than 1,000 threats. On the edges of the mountains, in the plateaus that are not mentioned in the books of empires, the bee used to perfume itself freely from one flower to another, without maps, without political intentions, just searching for nectar, as if to say, as long as life continues, honey is possible. Honey was not just a sweetness added to food, but a magical substance carried in jars, mixed with herbs, and preserved in tombs. For thousands of years, it was considered a gift from the gods. It does not spoil or rot, and it remains valid even after the death of whoever stored it. In the Egyptian royal tombs, jars of honey were found that were still valid after 3,000 years. They were not only intended for eating, but were placed near the dead as a reminder of a journey beyond. Life honey was not only for taste, but for protection, purification, and hope. In ancient medicine, honey was mixed with other ingredients to treat wounds, burns, and eye diseases. No serious doctor was without a bottle of honey in his box. Priests used it in their rituals, mixing it with oils and anointing statues of gods with it or offering it as sacrifices. In villages where poverty was part of the day, honey was used as the only available medicine. Mothers would rub it on the gums of their infants to relieve pain or mix it with hot water to calm the stomach. It was not only valuable because of its rarity, but also because it gave a rare feeling of reassurance in those ages. People trusted honey more than doctors themselves, as it does not scream and does not make mistakes. The potion asks for no fee and does not leave suddenly. A pure substance that carries in its golden consistency something of the wisdom of nature, as if it were saying that things that are made quietly remain. In many cultures, honey was the first food that touched the mouth of a newborn and sometimes the last thing placed on the lips of the dead. The medicine of beginnings and endings. If honey is the apparent sweetness, then beeswax is the silent guardian. A substance similar to gold, but it is used not for decoration but for preservation, for insulation, and to illuminate what the sun does not see. In ancient times, contracts and wills were sealed with wax, not just ink. The wax seal was more than a security device. It was a documented promise, a sign that what was inside the wrapping had value. Since wax only melts with heat, it was not broken except in case of need or betrayal. On ships, wax was used to insulate planks from water, to fill gaps and prevent the sea from leaking into the goods. This was not a simple task, but rather a matter of survival. How many ships were saved from sinking, not thanks to the captain, but thanks to that small substance that these bees swarmed silently. And in the temples, candles made of natural wax lit prayers. Their fire wasn't loud, but quiet, resembling meditation. Even their sound, if you listen closely, has a light rustle, as if they were whispering something ancient. Perhaps for this reason, candles were used in rituals that required tranquility. In marriages, births, and the funerals of the nobles. Their fire accompanied the decisive moments, not for display, but for passage. Some priests even believed that pure wax was able to trap words, and that whoever writes on a tablet coated with wax, the letters do not die, but wait patiently for someone to read them. The wax was an alternative memory that did not betray. No small creature has enjoyed the symbolic reverence that the bee has enjoyed across civilizations. It was not considered just an insect, but a mediator between the two worlds, the human world and the unseen world. This buzzing was, for some peoples, a message from heaven. In ancient Greece, the Greeks linked the bee to the goddesses Artemis and Demeter. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and virginity, and Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and fertility. The bee combined the purity of the first and the generosity of the second. The priestesses in some temples were called bees, and it was believed that they had the ability to hear internally, the ability to capture hidden inspiration, as the bee captures the nectar of rare flowers. It was not strange that some philosophers compared the bee to the human soul, a small, hard-working soul that lives in a group and produces something sweeter than its effort. Some of them even said, if we understood the beehive, we would understand the ideal city. As for India, the bee was associated with the god Krishna, as he was sometimes depicted dragging honey from his skin, a symbol of grace, nature, and lawful pleasure. In Hindu texts, the bee was one of the symbols of meditation because of its external stillness and internal movement. In ancient cultures, the bee was not only a symbol of purity or diligent work, but it was an embodiment of the idea of self-discipline. It does not sting unless it is forced to, it builds tirelessly, and it dies if it betrays the system of its group, as if it were saying that purity does not mean weakness, but rather accuracy in timing and steadfastness in the mission. Thus, the bee walked between myth and science, barefoot and mistaking the road in the heart of Asia Minor and among the ancient Hittite cities. Inscriptions were found describing a unique ritual in which bees were released into a house or temple to carry away evil. The ritual was not only symbolic but was carried out with caution and order. The bee was not a creature but a winged priest. The Hittites believed that some evil spirits inhabited walls or stuck to bodies, and that the bee, with its ability to fly and penetrate, could reach where a person could not purify himself. Therefore, a swarm of bees was released with incantation words to carry away illness, sadness, or envy. In other peoples, the people of the house were keen to inform the bees of every major event, birth or marriage, or death. This was not a metaphor, but rather an established custom. Someone would go to the hive and whisper the news to it, and if the head of the household died and the hive was not informed, it might be said that the bees would leave or die. It was believed that bees had a spiritual sense. If they got angry, the crops would spoil, and if they abandoned, that was a bad omen. But if they remained loyal, that was a sign of the purity of the house and the integrity of its intentions. In some funeral rituals, a honeycomb was placed on the chest of the deceased, as if it were provisions for the journey after life or a reminder of the mother's passage in the other worlds. Bees were not just a mobile farm, but rather a creature that played a role in the balance of the soul, society, and nature. Perhaps this is what made ancient man not dare to raise bees without respect or without whispering. When the Roman Empire expanded, it did not limit itself to bringing gold, slaves, and marble from distant regions, but also brought knowledge, including the art of beekeeping. However, the Romans, with their practical nature, were not satisfied with rituals and myths. They turned the bee into an organized agricultural and economic project in farms extending from Spain to Syria. Hives were erected in various forms, some of them made of pottery and some carved in stone, according to the nature of the climate and soil. Roman farmers moved with their hives according to the seasons, searching for the most suitable pastures for flowers, relying on accurate observations about the winds and humidity. Honey was produced in huge quantities and was stored in special jars, some of which were designated for export, some for the kitchen, and others for medicines and rituals. But what is amazing is that bees were not limited to farmers only, but were used in armies. Yes, Roman soldiers in some campaigns carried jars filled with bees, not to eat honey, but as a weapon in sieges or raids. These jars were thrown at the enemy to release angry swarms that would confuse and disorient and might decide an entire battle without a sword. Some Roman philosophers, such as Virgil, wrote long texts glorifying bees, not only as a source of honey, but as an example of organized life, sacrifice, and loyalty to the queen. For them, the beehive embodied the ideal empire, an individual who knows his place, works silently, and gives his life for everyone. It is as if they said, "Consider the bees and learn how Rome is." When a person opens a beehive for the first time, he does not see only interconnected golden combs, but rather opens a door to a silent, complex system that resembles a small world operating without a ruler to issue orders and without a policeman to monitor. Only instinct, precision, and a rhythm that does not deviate from the hive. Every bee has a clear role. There are those who collect nectar, those who clean the hive, those who flaps their wings to adjust the temperature, and those who guard the entrance against strangers. There is no rest, no negotiation, and no rebellion. Everyone works, and everyone knows when to withdraw when their mission is completed. The queen is present, yes, but she is not a ruler in the sense we know. She does not issue orders, but rather produces a chemical substance that determines who works and who is allowed to give birth. Her presence is similar to the heartbeat, necessary, but it does not speak. Imagine seeing this precision in a society millions of years old that did not invent electricity or language, but produced an ideal hexagonal geometry in which no space is wasted and in which no one needs external orders. That is why the beehive was not only a farm, but a living laboratory in which the wise taught lessons in discipline and in the relationship between the individual and the group. Some of them saw in it a model for the ideal city where no one is above the law and no one is outside the system. The ancient farmers learned more from bees than they did from orators. They saw it as building and rebuilding, purifying the inside and defending the outside. It was not only a source of honey, but a mirror in which people were supposed to look long and hard in an age in which there was no voice except for swords and no value except for those who owned gold or land. The bees kept saying something else in a language that was not written but understood thousands of years after the appearance of the first civilizations. Even if kings have disappeared and walls have collapsed, beehives still buzz as they were. Their laws have not changed, their parties have not split, and they have not built walls to protect them from themselves. In many museums around the world, you find fossilized honeycombs, pottery tools for preserving wax, and manuscripts that talk about how to raise bees as in the time of the wise, but they are just remnants. As for the real bees, they are still alive, continuing the mission far from everything that man has forgotten or distorted. In remote villages today, some still place a beehive near their homes, not only to collect honey, but because they believe that its presence brings blessings and keeps the place alive. Some grandmothers whisper small prayers when the bees pass by their faces, as if they are greeting an ancient, silent, but well-known visitor. Perhaps the greatest thing we inherited from bees is not honey, but this instinctive belief that order does not need noise, that work can be worship, and that the smallest creature may carry the greatest lesson. When cities fall silent and history slumbers, the wings continue to flutter to a rhythm we do not know, but it reassures us that something is still right in the heart. Central Asia, where the wind never stops and the horizon is wide open to the point of exhaustion. Cities aren't built, tents are pitched, walls aren't raised, stakes are tightened. There, amidst the dust and horses, Tamir's was born. She wasn't the daughter of an ornate civilization or a stone kingdom, but of the steppes, a land of unforgiving proportions that rewards the resilient. The Masagtai tribes to which she belonged lived on the edge, farming in the summer and fighting in the winter. They knew no inactivity and didn't trust stillness. As a child, she didn't learn to read or write. She learned how to gallop on a horse before she could walk, and how to hunt before she could talk much. The stories she heard weren't of kings or gods, but of knights lost in the snow and mothers fighting to defend their tents. It wasn't her title of queen that gave her power, but her ability to make decisions in an instant and bear the full consequences. When her husband, the tribal chief, died, there was no long discussion. The tribes chose her because no one else knew the steppes as she did, and no one knew when to fight and when to be patient. Elsewhere, empires were built with stones, decrees, and envoys, but here they were built with horses and memory. Her name was Tamiris. On the other side of the world, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, was expanding his kingdom as a skilled player moves chess pieces. Cities fell, others surrendered, and borders grew like an unstoppable shadow. But the steppes were not in his initial calculations. For him, they were a mysterious spot on the map inhabited by people who rode horses and ate fire, nothing more. But when the borders of the Masagtai came into direct contact with his possessions, Cyrus decided to take action. He didn't start a war, but rather proposed marriage to Tamiris. He said this step would unite the peoples, ensure peace, and bind the tribes to the heart of the empire, But she saw in his offer a soft ambush, not an honorable pact. She refused quietly, but she did not hide what she understood, that this proposal was not respect, but a means of annexation without the blood of Karsh. His pride was wounded. He did not stop at the refusal. He prepared a military campaign that carried on the surface a political response, but in its essence the desire to dominate this world that did not fully recognize him. He thought that victory would be easy, as his army was trained and his equipment was advanced, and all his previous battles ended with bows before his throne, but he did not yet know the meaning of fighting for the soil, not the throne. The Persian attack was not surprising from the political point of view, but it was tragic from the personal point of view. In one of the early skirmishes, Tomarus' only son, Spari, was captured and taken to Karsh's camp. There, according to the stories, the king tried to persuade him to join his ranks or to be a tool of pressure on his mother. But Spari, who grew up on the toughness of the steppes, refused. The stories say that Karsh treated him gently at first, then tightened the noose on him. In the end, Spari died in mysterious circumstances. It was said that it was suicide, and it was said that it was the result of torture, and it was said that his death was a message. When the news reached Tomarus, she did not scream, she did not wail, she did not rebuke, but looked at the wind and said, "His name will be written on the steppes, not on marble." This was not a sentence of anger, but a promise. From that moment, the battle was no longer political or even tribal. It became personal. The tents turned into a military planning cell and the steppes into a waiting theater. She did not rush to respond, but waited until the earth itself decided that the time had come. At night, Tomarus walked among the horses, touching their necks, whispering to them what was inaudible. During the day, she supervised the arrangements, determined the positions, and plotted the attack as a poison artist paints a mural that would be told for centuries. She did not want the battle, but Cyrus brought her to the threshold of her tent, and he would pay the price. The dawn of the day of the battle was unusually calm for the steppes. The clouds stretched in the sky like old skin, and the dew weighed down the grass. Tomarus stood on a small hill, looking at the expansive plain where the forces of Kash waited, lined up as in combat books, armored and in order. He advanced with measured steps, but Tomarus' army was not an army in the Persian sense. It did not have columns of spectators tied around spears. It was made up of horsemen who knew the land as they knew their own breath. They moved freely, appearing and disappearing, changing and then retreating. The plan was simple: lure Cyrus to advance into an ambush, and he did so. He sent his army deep into the plain, where he believed victory was near. Suddenly, he was surrounded from three sides by 3 arrows of the Masajte, which came from every direction, as if they were an extension of the wind, not a human hand. And the disaster began. The horsemen struck the rear ranks, then pounced on the rear, while the Persian army was trying to reposition itself in vain. It was not. The battle was equal, but it wasn't unfair. Karsh thought his numbers were enough to break the tribe's resolve, but he forgot that grief mixed with dust can become an earthquake. No one knows exactly how Karsh died. Some accounts say he was killed in the heart of the battle, under the hooves of horses. Others claim he was captured and brought to Tomarus. One, according to Herodotus, says she took his head, dipped it in a skin of blood, and said, "Here, I will be quenched with what I have spilled." But whether that was metaphorical or literal, the result was the same. Karsh no longer came back from the steppes. That in itself was a declaration that a land was not easily conquered. The battle was over and its dust had dispersed, but Tomarus did not return to a celebration or a procession. No statues were erected for her, and her faces were not stamped on coins. Instead, she sat at the edge of a plain, listening to the groans of the wounded and watching the birds of the steppe slowly return to their lands. She knew that true victory was not measured by the number of dead or the withdrawal of the enemy, but by survival. With silence returning to the place as if it had been waiting for that since the time of the tribes gathered to bless them but did not make a speech, she was satisfied with a long look at the horizon and said only one sentence: "Do not destroy the earth twice," and she returned to her tent, not as a conqueror, but as a woman exhausted by sorrows and refused to trade with them. Months passed, then years, and the steppes did not witness an invasion the size of a shark's campaign. No one dared to test the borders of this land again, not because it was stronger, but because memory was still fresh, as if it was guarding itself. Although the name Tomyris was not engraved on the obelisks or recorded in the records of the palaces, it was documented in the songs, in the oral poems, in the stories of grandmothers, and in the eyes of women who knew that they were not weak, no matter how few thrones they had. With the passage of time, the name Tomyris did not fade, but its form changed. It was transformed from the name of a woman to a symbol. She was no longer remembered only as a warrior or as a queen, but she appeared in the stories as a spirit hovering over the steppes, warning invaders and guiding girls on stormy nights. In some villages, it was believed that whoever saw the shadow of a woman on a horse at dawn was a harbinger of war or a promise of protection. In the oral epics told by storytellers, Tomyris spoke to horses, transformed sand into shields, and hid cities among the clouds. The tales were exaggerated, but within them were the seeds of truth. It was not easy for anyone to forget the woman who refused to submit, neither by marriage nor by the sword. The woman who rebelled for her son, not by shouting, but by a studied military tactic. The woman who did not ask for history, but obtained it against the will of the book. In the centers of civilization, where biographies were written in ink, Tomyris was painted as a savage queen, outside the norms, closer to anger than to wisdom. But on the outskirts of empires, where knowledge was transmitted by tongue, not pen, she was told of as if she were a saint, the embodiment of the idea that no one has the right to usurp the land, no matter how powerful he is. In ancient cave drawings, some mysterious engravings were found. A woman on horseback wearing a bow on her back, and behind her a flock of birds flying against the wind. Perhaps not all of them were about her, but no one doubted that they were very similar to her. The Massagetes left no stone monuments, palaces, or towering columns, but they left something else. A memory transmitted by tongues, not books. Tomyris was at the center of this memory. In nomadic societies, where there was no place for statues or documents, stories became laws. Tomyris' story was told to sons and daughters, not just as a tale of courage, but as a guide to behavior. In every house of the skin, there was someone who would say, "Don't be weaker than Tomyris and don't more greedy than Gorsh," the idea of just revenge, defending honor, not falling for soft deception. All of these are lessons learned from that distant confrontation. Even the fighting methods of some tribes continued to follow tactics attributed to the Battle of Tomyris against the Persians, from the quick raid to the encirclement from behind. In songs sung at the birth of girls, some mothers would whisper ancient names among them, her name, not wishes for tenderness, but for strength, as it was said that the girl called Marissa or Marai in some ancient dialects carried within her the spirit of the queen who does not bow. This was not just a popular imagination, but a real cultural formation inherited by people as if they memorized the shape of the steppe sky or the taste of the wind in winter. Tomyris was not invented, but she chose to leave her mark on the skins, not on the marble. No one knows where Tomyris was buried. No grave, no headstone, no specific date. It is only the possibility that her body became part of the land that protected her. Ironically, this absence did not weaken her presence, but rather made it more spacious on the nights in which she howled. The winds over the steppes, the shepherds sit around the fire and talk about her as if they saw her yesterday. One of them says that she did not die, but rather turned into a shadow racing the horses. Another adds, "When the wind blows from the north and the horses suddenly change, know that Tomyris left her tent." And although empires have changed, maps have been altered, and languages have been forgotten, her name remains stuck, not in the royal councils, but in the mouths of people who resemble her. Perhaps she did not achieve civilization in the traditional sense, nor did she build monuments or issue a system of government, but she achieved something deeper. She established the idea that if a woman is connected to the land, with wisdom and just anger, she can change the course of history, not as an exception, but as a forgotten rule. And so her story ended as it began, without noise, without announcement, only a distant echo of the footsteps of a horse moving away and not turning around. Horses, and another adds, when the wind blows from the north and the horses suddenly change. Know that Tamira's left her tent, and although empires changed and maps were altered and languages were forgotten, her name remains stuck not in the royal councils but in the mouths of people who resemble her. Perhaps she did not achieve civilization in the traditional sense and did not build monuments or issue a system of government, but she achieved something deeper. She established the idea that if a woman is connected to the land with wisdom and just anger, she can change the course of history, not as an exception but as a forgotten rule, and thus her story ended as it began, without noise, without announcement, only a distant echo of the footsteps of a horse moving away and not looking back. Horses, and another adds, when the wind blows from the north and the horses suddenly change. Know that Tamira's left her tent, and although empires changed and maps were altered and languages were forgotten, her name remains stuck not in the royal councils but in the mouths of people who resemble her. Perhaps she did not achieve civilization in the traditional sense and did not build monuments or issue a system of government, but she achieved something deeper. She established the idea that if a woman is connected to the land with wisdom and just anger, she can change the course of history, not as an exception but as a forgotten rule, and thus her story ended as it began, without noise, without announcement, only a distant echo of the footsteps of a horse moving away and not looking back.